Good morning, Joregel, dear friends of Yamnaya, guys. And first of all, I want to say many thanks to Gabi, to Volker, and Franco for the invitation, and also for the idea to present you the Transylvanian locals and foreigners from the third millennium BC. Transylvania, from a political geographical perspective, is the region delineated by the Apuseni, southern and eastern Carpathians. It lies between the northern Pontic steppe and the Great Hungarian Plain. In terms of area, measuring approximately 57,000 square kilometers, it is larger than other countries in the region, such as Croatia or Slovakia, for example. The name originated from the Latin phrase terra ultra silvam, land beyond the forest, which was used in a document dating back to 1075. The term partes Transylvania first appears in the 12th century in the Legenda Sancti Gerardi, and later evolves into Transylvania in medieval documents of the Hungarian kingdom. Geographically, the Transylvanian plateau stands out, with elevation ranging between 300 and 500 meters. This plateau has several geographical subdivisions delimited by the courses of major rivers such as Mureș, Someș, or Trnava. In the eastern part of the province, separated by the high mountains of Arghita, there are distinct geographical units such as the Chuk or Brașov depressions. These areas had, as we shall see in prehistory, a cultural evolution distinct from what occurred in the Transylvanian plateau. While Transylvania may seem like a formidable fortress surrounded by mountains with altitudes of over 2,000 meters, there existed a series of passes or roads over the mountains that connected the intra-Carpathian region with the extra-Carpathian area. In order to control the traffic along these significant routes, a series of Roman forts, medieval fortresses, and Austrian customs were built here in later times. The valley of the major rivers flowing out of Transylvania, Mureș, Olt, Someș, Criș, primarily face westwards the Great Hungarian Plain, or southwards the Lower Danube region, thus facilitating connection with these areas. As we shall see, there were occasions when the local Transylvanian communities crossed the Carpathians, or when foreigners settled large areas of western and eastern Transylvania in pursuit of a new life. The earliest information about archaeological sites, which would later be attributed to the third millennium BC, dates back to 1865, when Friedrich Wilhelm Schuster, director of the German gymnasium in Sebeș-Mühlbach, made the archaeological site of Râpa Roșie known. Hans Reinhardt, a professor from Transylvania, whose scientific trajectory later became associated with Nazi ideology, is the one who, following study trips undertaken in 1924 and 1926 to the Museum of Cluj and Sibiu, became familiar with a series of Transylvanian prehistoric discoveries. From a typological standpoint, he categorized the studied materials into an older and younger type. The older phase was characterized by decoration using techniques such as Furchenstich and pseudochord. This category is associated with the Bohemian and Moravian regions, specifically the early phase of the Eichbühl culture. In 1933, Hermann Schroller continued the research using the same typological terms. On this occasion, 52 finds of the Furchenstich ceramic type and 61 sites with Linsen ceramic materials were mapped and catalogued. According to contemporary German tradition, the presence of such elements in the late Transylvanian Neolithic was interpreted as resulting from a migration from Central Europe, driven by the desire to access the region's abundant gold, copper, and salt resources. By An irony of fate, all these finds from Transylvania were grouped together by Ioan Nestor in 1933 under the name of the Kotzofeni culture, named after a site in Oltenia, investigated by Karol Schuchat during the First World War, but never published. Without illustrating any ceramic fragment, Nestor dated this new archaeological culture to the late Neolithic. This is how the Kotzofeni culture came into existence. Perhaps rightly so, in a study completed in 1937 but published in 1941, Marton Roșca proposed using a different name for what Nestor had defined as Kotzofeni culture. Based on the excavation of Istvan Kovács at Korpadia, Kolos-Korpad, he used the term Kolos-Korpad I. Roșca's contribution lies in the collecting and mapping 325 finds. He concluded that this culture represented an ethnic group that migrated into Transylvania from the north in three successive ways. Chronologically, Roșca was the first to place what is now called the Kotzofeni culture in the Neolithic, specifically in the second half of the 3rd millennium BC. The first significant excavation of a Kotzofeni site was conducted by Fritz Roth in 1941 and 1942 at Kılnik in central Transylvania. He died in 1942 at Stalingrad. During this excavation, an area of approximately 1,500 square meters was investigated, revealing no less than 15 dwellings and several pits. The Romantic period of the quest to define a series of cultural realities of the 3rd millennium BC concluded with the publication of the first monographs dedicated to this period in the 1970s. Notably, 2 volumes published by Alexandru Vulpe on the Axis, and the still topical synthesis with Petre Roman as the first author on the Kotzofeni culture, the Baden culture, and the Transylvanian coded pottery horizon emerged as significant contributions. In the 1990s, several generations of archaeologists from Transylvania defended and published their doctoral works on the 3rd millennium BC. These contributions were complemented by numerous other monographs with notable contribution from Horea Ciucudean on the issues surrounding the Kotzofeni culture and the cultural realities of the early Bronze Age, standing out as particularly noteworthy. Another significant stage was marked by Cristian Ioan Popa, PhD, on the Kotzofeni culture, which was awarded in 2009. This milestone was followed by the publication of several monographs on the cultural realities of the 3rd millennium BC in Transylvania, further advancing our understanding on this period. I like to conclude. I like to conclude this historical presentation by highlighting that today we benefit from significant contributions to the reconstruction of the Transylvanian Palo environment. The examples mentioned here represent just a few of these contributions. These efforts enable us to understand social responses to environmental changes. For instance, the fact that winters became notably warmer at the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC helps explain why Kotzofeni communities ended up settling at altitudes above 1,000 meters. Additionally, the increasing presence of spores of coprophilious fungi and a reduction in crop values suggest a high abundance of grazing animals in the area. Cooler conditions between 2800 and 2400 BC may have influenced grazing as the primary agricultural activity. But let's go back to those local and foreigners who lived in Transylvania in the 3rd millennium BC. It should mention from the very beginning that since 1999, I have argued, together with other specialists such as Horea Ciucudean, for the use of the same relative chronological system for the Bronze Age in Transylvania and Western Romania as the one used in Hungary. Even though I was and still am circumspect about the beginning of the Bronze Age in the 3rd millennium, I consider it to be to everyone's advantage to use a common chronological language for the cultural realities evolving in both spaces. Thus, the third millennium BC covers the last 3 or 4 to 4 centuries of late Copper Age or Neolithic and early Bronze Age. The later was structured in 3 stages. The same system is used today by other colleagues in Transylvania, as you can see from this slide. However, this system is not agreed by all Romanian specialists. For those who deal with the extra-Carpathian area, the Bronze Age begins around 3500 BC, as in Bulgaria or North Pontic area, for example. For Central and Western Europe, the third millennium BC does not belong to the Bronze Age. Obviously, it is not the case to debate these things now, and therefore I will try to use only absolute dates for representative finds of this period. The absolute data for the third millennium BC have recently been summarized by 2 groups of researchers. To this should be added more than 20 samples recently obtained for the Izbucu Toplice de Vida cave, finds that I will talk about a little later. As can be seen, they are relatively few, which means that many of the cultural realities of the third millennium BC in Transylvania are not very well defined chronologically. However, if I had to give this presentation last year, I would have been much more general, and I'm convinced that if I'm invited in 2 years to speak about the same thing, I'll be able to come up with new clarification. The most representative archaeological culture of the second half of the 4th millennium and the 1st century of the 3rd millennium BC is the so-called Coțofeni culture. If Horaciu Gudean in 2000 listed 613 sites with Coțofeni finds in Transylvania, 9 years later, Cristian Ioan Popa, in his doctoral thesis, collected more than 1,500 sites with Coțofeni finds in Romania, Serbia, and Bulgaria. From the statistics provided by Alin Frânculasa, one can see that huge discrepancy between the number of sites known from the cultural realities surrounding the Coțofeni world, for example, Foltești 30 sites, Cernavodă 20 sites. Today, the area of distribution of this ceramic style is much larger than was known 15 years ago, with Coțofeni communities crossing south of the Carpathians and reaching as far as Valahia, Prahova County. Here they first came into contact with the Yamnaya world. The origin of the Coțofeni ceramic style can be found in what has been defined archaeologically as the Cernavodă 3 Boleras world. It spread in the mid-4th millennium BC over wide areas from southern Romania and northern Bulgaria to Serbia and the Great Hungarian Plain. This process of regionalization occurred in Transylvania in the second half of the 4th millennium BC. In 2009, we recorded almost 120 sites spread throughout Transylvania. Near Cluj at Florești in western Transylvania, in 2007, during a large rescue excavation, we investigated the traces of a burned village, discovering 10 surface dwellings and several storage pits or other facilities outside the dwellings. As we have said, improved climatic conditions towards the end of the 4th millennium BC and the beginning of the next millennium, with very warm winters, led to greater mobility of the Coțofeni communities. They began to live consistently on high land with good visibility of their surroundings. In western Transylvania, in the Apuseni Mountains, the settlements at the base of isolated cliffs were extremely popular. It is likely that in addition to the natural protection they offered, there was also a spiritual dimension, which is still found today in shepherd communities. These rocks look like real gods watching over the destiny of the community. Caves also became temporary shelters for people and animals. In almost all the caves in Transylvania that offer favorable living conditions, but also in other regions where this community spread, we found Kotzofan ceramic fragments. Archaeological excavation have identified fireplaces, traces of wooden structures, and a considerable amount of pottery. The stratigraphy of such sites could exceed 1 meter. In fact, on the basis of the research in the cave of Athis at Baile Herculane in southwestern Romania, Petre Roman has developed the internal chronology of this archaeological culture. Obviously, pottery is the main category of finds from the Kotzofan sites. After 3200 BC, new forms and ornaments appear, more Baroque in style, which became characteristic of the so-called Kotzofan III phase. This phase will have a long evolution of almost 400 years. The Furhenstich technique of pottery decoration, as described it by the first German researchers who dealt with this pottery, is outstanding. Metal pieces are scarce. They are small daggers, flat and flanged axes, and other small objects, all made of copper. Representations on pottery of spectacle-shaped pendants suggest the production of such pieces as early as the late 4th or early 3rd millennium BC. Many researchers, some of them present, believe that the appearance of massive copper shaft-hole axes in the Carpathian Basin occurs as early as the second half of the 4th millennium BC, though spreading to the Kotzofan communities. For the time being, we have no real context linking such axes to the world of Kotzofan from Transylvania. There is only indirect evidence such as the Haro axe found in the vicinity of a Kotzofan settlement. In the highlands of western Transylvania, near the Kotzofan settlements, dozens of burial mounds have been identified. Their dimensions are not very large, up to 10 meters wide and 1 meter high, and they were built using local stone. In the absence of stone, the burial mounds were built out of earth, as in the case of the mound investigated by Dragos Diaconescu and his team at Silivașul de Jos. Here, it could be demonstrated that the mound was built at the time of the Kotzofan culture in the last quarter of the 4th millennium BC at a pre-Yamnaya horizon. Later, the mound was also used by the Yamnaya communities who arrived in Transylvania in the first quarter of the 3rd millennium BC. Further discoveries such as the graves in the tumuli of Tureni, Câmpia Turzii, Agriș also confirm the presence of Yamnaya communities in Transylvania due to the position of the deceased, orientation, or the use of ochre. Other monuments of North Pontico region are the stone anthropomorphic stelae. 8 such menhirs are known from Transylvania. They have been connected to the arrival of Yamnaya population in the Carpathian Basin. Only one has been found in a funerary context, but in a secondary position and cannot be dated with certainty. Anthropomorphic stone stelae can be representation of the social status of elite in a trans-regional dialogue. The recent publication of Horea Ciucudean and his team of the excavation at Hăpria provides us with some insight into the relation that the local communities had with those foreigners we identify today as the Yamnaya world. Hăpria is situated in the valley of the Mureș River, the main route from the west for the Yamnaya communities. Here, an earth mound was erected over a Kotzofan settlement shortly afterwards. The Kotzofan habitation extends to approximately 2900 Cal BC, and the earliest burials begin at the same time. The primary burial was located in the central area, being east or west orientated, with the head towards the west. The knees were down wide apart in the so-called frog-like arrangement, which is a special and rare type of burial completely unknown in the early Bronze Age graves from the Apuseni Mountains. The rest of the burials were dated later than 2900 BC and have analogies in the so-called Livesile group, which has been attributed to the early Bronze Age in western Transylvania. The tumuli of this group are much smaller, diameters below 10 meters and height below 1 meter, located on high ground spots between 400 and 1000 meters in altitude that provide good visibility. They generally have a round stone mantle. The funerary rite and ritual is also different than those of Yamnaya. First of all, they have no rectangular burial pit, no wooden structures, and the characteristic supine position of the deceased with the lower limbs bent and raised at the knees is also missing. The presence of ochre was not reported. The dead were buried in contracted position on the left or right side with different dispositions of the arms. The large number of burials contain bones that are not in anatomical connection, suggesting practices of post-mortal body manipulation. In the cases where the deceased are in an anatomical position, they are orientated predominantly on the northeast, southwest, or east-west direction. As the absolute data suggest, this burial practice is characteristic of western Transylvania throughout the early Bronze Age until the end of the 3rd millennium BC. Recent bioanthropological analysis of some skeletons did not indicate major differences between the individuals buried in the high area of the Apusén Mountains and those in the lower valley of the Mureș River. They belong to the same local cultural environment. Such analysis would also be required for individuals considered to belong to the Yamnaya communities in order to be able to compare them with the local population. Therefore, we cannot assess the intensity of collective context between Transylvania and the North Pontic region. The funerary inventory is quite poor. Apart from a few vessels, the presence of copper spectacle-shaped pendants or gold rings of type leucas is remarkable. If the 2 hair rings in the necropolis at Ampoița are made of gold, the one at Podele is made of copper, coated in gold leaf. In southeastern Transylvania, there is another burial rite and ritual. On the map are the sites marked with crosses. At Moakșa in 1979, a burial mound of circa 12 meter in diameter and 2 meter high was excavated. The deceased was probably a young man, less than 20 years old. He had been placed in a stone cist with his head to east, facing north, and with his legs to the west. As an inventory, he had a vessel with impressed cord decoration, suggesting contacts with the eastern world. With the help of several grants provided by the Ministry of Human Resources of Hungary, József Puskás and his team has recently dated this grave to around 2800 BC. In 1998, another grave cist made of stone slabs containing the skeleton of a woman and a man buried in a crouched position was excavated in St. Martin. Around the hip, 2 bone appliques, probably belt buckles, were found. The absolute data taken from a skeleton is placed to sigma between 2855 and 2572 Cal BC. This grave suggests the penetration into eastern Transylvania from the northeast of communities belonging to the globular amphora culture. Other absolute data allow us for the first time to fix a reliable chronological data for the so-called Žigodin culture, whose characteristic feature is the use of corded pottery. Its development in eastern Transylvania takes place in the second half of the 3rd millennium BC. This dating is also confirmed by 2 graves located near each other, discovered in the Poulenchuk site, not far from the Lelicen settlement, the most important settlement of the Žigodin group, which could not be associated here with other traces of habitation. For other pottery groups in southeastern Transylvania, such as Zabala, Zimnica Mlăjet, or Schneckenberg, we do not yet have absolute data. Their dating to the early Bronze Age, before and after the middle of the 3rd millennium BC, has been based on analogies with other more chronologically fixed areas. This is the case of some Schneckenberg settlements southeast of Carpathians in Buzău County, which allowed dating these communities from about 2800 BC to the end of the 3rd millennium BC. János Emődy's archaeospeleological research has led to the discovery of corded pottery in a series of caves in western Transylvania. Their chronological position could not be fixed with certainty. Chance made that in 2021, together with speleologists, biologists, anthropologists, etc., we started a pilot project at this Bucul Topliței de Vida cave in order to create an archaeological and a photogrammetric database of the site, to conduct absolute dating of the findings, to perform anthropological analysis of human remains, to analyze sediment dynamics, and explore their paleohydrological and paleoclimatic significance, etc. The research has been quite difficult, but the findings are extremely spectacular. When you enter into the so-called Hall of Tombs, the entire gallery, which measures about 40 by 6 meters, is covered with human skeletons, pottery, grain, animal bones, etc. The metal pieces are quite numerous on the cave floor. There are gold rings ranging from simple pieces to those Noppenringe. From what I have checked so far in the bibliography, this would be the earliest pieces of this type. To them is added a copper X. For an archaeological excavation, we selected an area where there were 2 skeletons in situ. The archaeological investigation, which was very difficult given the conditions in the cave, led to the identification of 2 children, aged 2-3 years and 9-10 years, respectively. One of them showed signs of violent death. Their absolute dating coincides with that of other human remains on the cave surface, circa 2500–2300 BC. The 9–10-year-old child who was killed had a copper ring as an inventory piece that was discovered in the head area. Of the 2 axes mentioned by the first speleologist who visited the cave, we could only recover 1. From a typological point of view, it can be attributed to the Dumbrăvioara type after the typology of Alexandru Vulpe. These are axes that were cast in bivalve molds open at the upper edge of the axe. They have been dated between 2700 and 2500 BC. The absolute data we have so far, however, suggests that this axe may have been used between 2500 to 2300 BC. The axe was made of copper, like other pieces found isolated in the area. A similar data is given to the Dumbrăvioara copper axe, discovered in the south of the pond in a burial mound attributed to the late corded ware culture as Chitna. I would like to point out that the new axes discovered with the help of metal detectors confirm the existence of the so-called one-piece depositions on this horizon. This explains why the vast majority of shaft hole axes from the 3rd millennium BC are isolated finds. The absolute data we have ensure the dating of the corded pottery or vessels with asymmetrical handles attributed to the so-called Roșia group after the middle of the 3rd millennium BC. The end of the early Bronze Age in Transylvania was established as in Hungary, towards the end of the 3rd millennium BC. The so-called Besenstrich und Textilmuster ceramic horizon spreads over wide areas from Transylvania, southern and western Romania, to eastern Hungary, southern Poland. Ceramic artifacts are decorated with striations and pseudo-textile impressions. This homogeneous ceramic production horizon will be at the origin of the classical culture of the Middle Bronze Age in Transylvania, the Wittenberg culture, but a cultural reality characteristic to the 2nd millennium BC. Instead of conclusions, in the Timișoara Temesvar of my childhood, before the small houses were replaced by a 10-story communist block of flats, we played all together, Romanians, Hungarians, Germans, and Jews. The Serbs played separately. We always saluted our parents with Săru mâna, Ciocolom, or Kiss the hand. Later we learned to love or hate each other. It's all part of life. Was it like that in the 3rd millennium BC in Transylvania? We may never know, but that doesn't stop us for trying to find out. Thank you.